I have always been a bit of an introvert. Wild parties, getting stupid drunk, and chasing girls were never part of my life. I'm a very serious, well-focused person. People that took to those sort of things had no use for someone as predictable as me. One day I wanted to be married to the prettiest girl I knew, who just happened to live next door. I've known Angela or Angie, which is what I like to call her, but only to myself, since we were both 10 years old. I've dreamed about how perfect life would be with her. I think she's amazing. Problem is, she knows who I am, but our conversations are always uncomfortable. I lack confidence when it comes to girls, especially this one. I feel like she's being polite, but avoids me if she can. Sometimes I thought maybe one day some cool kid would friend me and teach me to have the confidence to talk to someone as perfect as Angela, and that's exactly what happened. I decided to eat my lunch on the patio at school. Halfway into my PB&J, this guy sits down next to me. He says his name is Rocco. What's mine, and what the hell am I eating? I shook my head and replied, David, PB&J, and who the hell names their kid Rocco? It's a biblical name, he replied. We made eye contact, and we both laughed. I like you, kid. Get rid of the sandwich. I got some friends you gotta meet. He put his fingers in his mouth and let out this ear-piercing whistle. 2 guys and a girl walked over. He pointed to a tall, skinny guy. This here's Weasel. Next we got Sly, and last, but most likely to beat your ass, is my sister Raven. He leaned in about 6 inches from my face and said, That's right, biblical names. Our families are huge church people. Instantly they all began to laugh. Then Raven said, Wait, isn't there some Bible story about a guy named Dave and a big monster? David and Goliath, I said. Yeah, you guys seemed like churchgoers. Raven's face instantly became scary. She reminded me what her brother said about her being the most likely to kick my butt. I assured her I was just kidding. Then Rocco said they were all meeting up at the old cemetery on Hill Street tonight at about 11 o'clock. He told me to be there. It will be a blast. I had a quiet night of reading planned, but maybe this was that thing I was looking for to get me out of my shell. So at 11 sharp, I was at the Hill Street Cemetery. I thought it would be a bunch of kids partying. To my surprise, it was only Rocco, Weasel, Sly, and Raven. Sly looked impatient. Let's do this, he said. Do what? I said. Raven got right in my face and said, blow off some steam, that's what. All 4 did a group high five and began running in all directions, kicking over tombstones and destroying grave flowers. I stood in awe. Why would someone want to do this? After a few minutes, they noticed I wasn't participating. They all stopped and circled around me. What's your problem? Rocco asked. Then the others piled on. Yeah, I thought you were one of us. What are you afraid of, Mama's boy? The last dig came from Raven, and I got to say, it pissed me off. Fine, I said, and I walked over to a large monument and kicked it as hard as I could. Surprisingly, it fell over. As it hit the ground, a feeling of satisfaction raced through me. They all cheered me on. Again, again, again. I spotted a small fountain with a statue in the center. Without hesitation, I grabbed it with both hands and flipped it over. The cheers grew even louder. I felt like a rock star. Then the cheers were silenced by the sound of a whistle being blown from the roadside. I could see a police car and an officer shining his flashlight on us as he ran toward me. Rocco yelled, Over the fence, let's go. One by one, we cleared the fence and ran as fast as we could. After a lengthy sprint, we all slowed from exhaustion. Struggling for breath, I said, I think we lost him. Laughter erupted again. It was winded laughter, but they sure thought it was funny. We sat for a few, then Raven said she needed prayer. The others all chimed in. You know, you're right. We could all use some prayer. Let's go see Jesus. I had no clue what they were talking about, so I kept my mouth shut and followed their lead. We only walked about a half of a block when I saw the giant illuminated cross in front of the church. I could only hope they wanted to confess the recent sins we inflicted on the graves in the cemetery, but they had no plans for that. Rocco walked straight up to a beautiful leaded glass window and kicked it in. The tranquility I felt looking up at the giant cross was soon replaced by the sound of broken glass smashing onto the floor inside the church. Single file, we all crawled through the jagged opening. Raven said her and Rocco's parents used to bring them to this church as little kids. It was just as she remembered it. Then she laughed and said, "If I remember correctly, they keep the donation money right here." She opened a cabinet next to a large statue of the Virgin Mary. "Bingo," she yelled. She turned around holding a donation plate overflowing with money from the last service. She lit a cigarette and began cramming money into her pockets. "This is what I pray for," she said. The others flocked to her like a bunch of coyotes on a carcass. "I need some prayer. Yeah, me too." I couldn't believe my eyes. With no regard to the Bible's teachings, we just desecrated the Lord's house. I felt like a piece of crap. "I've got to get out of here," I said. "Yeah," Weasel replied. "That cop might still be looking for us." I crawled back through the window. Rocco was right behind me. As soon as my feet hit the grass, I heard a groan from behind me. "I just cut my arm on some broken glass." Rocco stood holding pressure on his left arm just above his wrist. I asked how bad it was. He said he just needed a first aid kit and it would be fine. My house was close by and I knew we had a first aid kit in the garage, so I told everyone we were going to my house. About 10 minutes later, we were in my garage. Rocco glued his cut closed and wrapped it in gauze. We hung out for about an hour when everyone decided it was time to go home. High fives and comments of what a blast of a night were repeated throughout the group. Raven gave me a hug and said I was a good addition to the group. I laughed and told her, "Yeah, I don't know how you guys got along without me." Rocco fist bumped me and said, "We'll see you tomorrow night. I got some big stuff planned." The following night at about 11 o'clock, I heard a bang on my window. Sure enough, it was them. I quietly slipped past my parents watching the news. When I got to the front yard, Rocco said, "Are you ready for a night you'll never forget?" "Sure, why not?" I answered. "Then let's do this," he said. As we walked past Angela's house, her bedroom light was on and she was at the window watching us. I paused under the streetlight and gave a shy wave. She looked nervous as she waved back. Then she closed the blinds and turned off the light. I picked up the pace and caught up to the gang. We walked about a block and Raven said, "This is it." "This is what?" I asked. "A vacant house that the owner's gone to Florida. We just got to figure out how to get in." Quietly, we all cased the outside until I found an unlocked window. One by one, we climbed in. The house was dark and quiet. I remembered an old woman sitting on the front porch during the midsummer. I wondered if she was the one who had gone to Florida. The house had an elderly person's feel to it. We moved about looking for anything of value. I walked up to a door and opened it. With the flick of a light switch, I could see a very steep flight of stairs. They obviously went to the basement. It looked unfinished. A very cold draft rushed over my body as I peered at the bottom. I left the light on so we could see better. Rocco was in the kitchen while Raven and the boys searched the front room. Suddenly, out of nowhere, someone pushed me from behind. It wasn't a hard push. I barely lost my balance. An old woman's voice yelled to get out of her house. She tried to push me again and said the police are on their way. I put my hand up in the surrender position to try and calm her down. As she stepped into the light, I could see it was the old woman from the porch. We made eye contact and she said she knew who I was. Suddenly, she was thrown toward the basement stairs. She caught herself on the doorframe and tried to regain her balance. Out of the darkness, Rocco gave her a final shove. The sounds of screaming and falling were horrific. I closed my eyes tight until it was over. As I looked down the stairs, her body laid motionless at the bottom. Rocco turned off the light and closed the door. "We're all done here," he said. He walked away as if nothing had happened. "Come on, guys, we gotta go before the cops come." I felt terrible because, with no regard for the old woman, I was the first one out of the window. We ran toward my house as police cars rushed to respond to the old woman's 911 call. The sirens grew louder as the police began to canvass the area. We stopped in front of my house. We all agreed to say nothing if questioned. I looked at Angela's house. Her bedroom light was on, and she was at the window staring at us. It's best if we split up, Rocco said. Sly and Weasel went one way and Rocco and Raven with the other. Just as they stepped into the darkness past the streetlight, I could hear Rocco yell, "I told you this would be a night you would never forget. See you tomorrow." His laughter carried off into the night. A police car rounded the corner with a spotlight on. I quickly ducked into the garage. I turned on a small light so I wouldn't draw attention. I sat on the floor with my head in my hands, trying to understand how I could have been a part of all of that. Tears poured from my eyes. Suddenly, the side door began to open slowly. "David?" A woman's voice called. "It's Angela. Are you okay?" I tried to compose myself. I quickly wiped the tears with the top of my forearm. That's when I noticed the gauze wrapped around my wrist. I grabbed it and ripped it off. Underneath was a 2-inch cut that had been glued closed. Angela approached cautiously. "Why were you out in the street tonight? Are the police looking for you? What's going on?" she asked. "Angela, I met some kids I thought were really cool, but they started doing really bad things, and when you had seen us out there, we just came from robbing and hurting an old woman in her home. I'm scared, and I don't know what to do." "You need to turn yourself in," she said. "Both times I saw you tonight, I watched you standing by the street talking to someone." "Yeah, those were the kids," I told her. "No, you don't understand," she said. "Both times you were by yourself, and you walked away by yourself. I think you need a doctor, David." Suddenly, it was like I was no longer in control of myself. I stood up and very aggressively said, "You know what I think?" as I walked over to the door. "I think my name's Rocco." Just then, I closed and locked the door. "You know what else I think?" as I picked up an old claw hammer on the workbench. "I think you should have kept your blinds closed." That's the last thing I remember. I woke up in this jail cell by myself. They tell me I have been here for almost a month. Every minute of the day I think about Angela. They won't tell me if she's okay. Rocco, Raven, Sly, and Weasel have proven to be demons that live in my head. Whatever happened, it's clear I have no control over any of them. I think this cage is where I belong. I don't ever want to hurt anyone again. Unfortunately, it's not up to me.